I thought that you had a good relationship with him, that he had begun to hear your warning.
I think kicking and screaming.
Kicking and screaming.
I think what we're seeing is the real Mark Zuckerberg.
I had first thought that what I might do is just busy myself with something else last night, our time, and not watch the US President Donald Trump's inauguration. But then the news hound in me won out. And I must say that from drill, baby, drill, to the renaming of the Gulf of Mexico, to everything else in between, I found it extremely chilling. And I just wondered, what are your thoughts on the day after that inauguration?
Still disbelief, that the president of the United States wants to rename the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America, or that there will be two genders. There were so many things in there that the United States now, I mean, the climate change treaty we had expected. But I guess what it did is I was half working while I was watching there. And I kept thinking, so what do we need to do? Given the lineup of what people have started calling the Broligarchy, the tech CEOs who will now have far less guardrails. In fact, the very thing that you and I were subjected to, information operations that aims to pound you to silence. Well, that's only the first part of it. The second part is it literally recreates a new reality. And the longer that goes unchecked, the more that reality gains credibility. And I think this is the world we're living in now. 8 years later, I mean, I pegged 2016 as the year that the political tipping point came down. The information operations, the social media platforms allowed this kind of experimentation on people, beginning in 2014. And what did you see then? You saw the annexation of Crimea. Those were the meta-narratives that were then used 8 years later in 2022 by Putin to invade Ukraine itself. And then in the Philippines, we saw history change. Ferdinand Marcos, who had been ousted in a people power revolt in 1986 because he was a kleptocrat, well, his only son and namesake became the president of the Philippines in 2022, partly because that history changed from kleptocrat to the greatest leader the Philippines has ever known. So that was the other science fiction, imagination, because I kept pushing myself. Where is this going to go? You have to imagine what the future can be. And, our upside down world slowly is solidifying itself as upside down. So we're going to have to see what the next few months is going to do.
That's really interesting. So you think that these ideas, mega ideas of territorial expansion, almost a new kind of colonialism, these are given impetus and power by the use of the information channels.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, because that's how it begins, right? Again, territorial expansion during the time that social media has taken over as the gatekeepers of the information ecosystem globally. What's happened since then? You've had more than one push for more territory, right? You have Putin, you have Netanyahu, you have a whole slew of these almost forgotten genocides. I mean, Myanmar, in my part of the world, and they're directly connected to the fact that you can now manipulate people at the cellular level of a democracy. You can now manipulate people without them realizing this. This is insidious manipulation, in the same way that, like, in the 1940s, how did Nazi Germany, how did 6 million Jews, how did that happen? It was always these big shifts in our physical world were connected with big shifts in communications. And I think that's what we're seeing today is the logical extension of the exploitation of surveillance for profit of the new gatekeepers of our public information ecosystem, the exploitation by those with power and money, right, who want to reshape the world. And we've seen this. So you've seen this. You guys have done Bell Pottinger.
We
You've
have.
literally shown state capture through manipulation, insidious manipulation of our public information ecosystem. And I think
Quite right.
the more dangerous part in all of this is that people don't acknowledge that they're being manipulated. And it goes beyond television and film, right? Because this is, you and I could be in the same room and we would be fed different realities. And it is exponential, it's the scale.
It feels like an appendage because it's in your hand. So it's much more close relationship. So the scholar Nanja Nyabolo said when she was watching that what it struck her was the state capture, the word she'd first heard problematized and theorized and made popular in South Africa, is what she was seeing in Washington yesterday. So there is an image out of that inauguration that I just want to go to. You referred to it a little bit, but it was really for me the dominant image out of the inauguration with the big tech titans. I think if you go from right, it was Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, Zuckerberg, and then Sundar Pichai in there. And so many people have today echoed the words of the outgoing President Joe Biden when he said, this is an oligarchy. So Prof. Julie Posetti and you as well have used the term Broligarchy. Can we deepen our understanding of what that means in the global context, and I guess also in the American context? It was so clear. The symbolism of it was so clear yesterday.
Yeah, absolutely. They were in the front row ahead of the legislators who are going to be governing, the elected officials who are going to be governing the United States. It's interesting that you would say from South Africa's view, because we've lived through this, right? That's, I think,
We
part
have.
of the reason it is so familiar to us. I mean, it's funny. I called it the Philippinization of American politics, right? And the inauguration of Rodrigo Duterte in 2016 was exactly the same thing. It was people bowing to him before, but I think what's chilling about America is that this isn't a small country like the Philippines. South Africa has a huge role to play in Africa, in your part of the world. It isn't us. This is the most powerful, you would argue, right? Was
Powerful
once the
nation.
most powerful nation in the world. And I think, to connect to what you had said, we have for almost a decade fought for safety measures on these tech platforms that have become the gatekeepers into our public information ecosystem. These tech platforms have our data, consume data at a scale that was unimaginable. It literally created clones of you and me. Anyone listening to this, if you're on Facebook, or you have a clone and it is you in data. And what happened is machine learning created that clone of you, then artificial intelligence put that all together into a massive database that is used to micro target your weakest moment to a message, right? Micro targeting is insidious manipulation that we didn't sign up for. So, what does that mean? This is the most unregulated industry globally. It's like allowing builders. This is Chris Wiley who said, you're walking into a collapsing building because they wanted to make more money, or the drug industry
Yeah.
testing drugs in the public market, and you just happen to be in the wrong side where, oh my gosh, that drug killed you, and there's absolutely no repercussion. It's absolute impunity. So in a way, what you saw was impunity, right? Now with them there, from 2016 to 2024, I would say,
Yes.
all of us, journalists, civil society, you and I, we've been at the front lines. We know the more and more countries have recognized that. Australia put in place a law that prevented children of below 16 years old. You
Yes.
have the Digital Services Act in Europe, the Digital Markets Act. Not enough, right? Because these were regulating what should have been the target of the regulations, which is the design of the platforms themselves, right? Who said that whoever allowed this kind of impunity, it snuck in? We never got there because of the tremendous tech lobby. And now, in full force, you see all the tech CEOs working hand in hand with an administration that will allow that. It's almost, here's another industry that needed to get regulated, took a long time and was extremely harmful: tobacco, right? It's like if you put the harms of this environment, and finally the tobacco CEOs, or here's another one: oil and
Yes.
gas. If you replace the tech CEOs with oil and gas CEOs, even as the climate, even as global warming, even as the fires in LA are there, right? So
Yes.
we know this is harmful. It's almost an unholy alliance. The power now will be used to open up again, to shift the world. And
Mm.
I think one of the things that we're going to have to do is to hold tight to the facts. And it's going to be significantly harder. So, again, I kept thinking, in the Philippines, the United States, and the EU helped turn our upside down world right side up.
Yes.
I joke that in the Philippines, we went from hell to purgatory. Hell of Rodrigo Duterte, when so many, human rights groups say up to 30,000 people killed in 3 years, right? With impunity. We hope to see some sense of justice because the ICC now is investigating Rodrigo Duterte, and there's a power. Having said that, part of the reason we turned right side up was because of the United States. Now, the question is, can we in the global South help the United States at a time when it is going to struggle for a shared reality based on facts?
That's the moment we sit with now. It was, I mean, that image wasn't totally unexpected, because
No.
just a couple of weeks ago, you warned of dangerous times ahead. When I know you would know better, but for us here, certainly for me, it was a complete surprise, that Meta announcement by Mark Zuckerberg that they were going to just end fact checking, something which all of us had fought for, experienced the value of, and been part of, to maintain what you call the shared reality. And I saw the tide turning on the disinformation order, partly by this army of fact checkers who were very key in our country to turning that tide on what we call state capture or grand corruption. That
Yeah.
for me came like a bolt from the blue. And you warned that we're in for dangerous times. So, in a short couple of weeks, would you say that we've now arrived at those dangerous times? That we are at a moment where a deep think is necessary? Because I don't know that you're going to be able to see what happened in Europe or Australia. South Africa is expecting the Competition Commission to come out with a report on the impacts of the big tech platforms on the media. They seem to be in a moment of enormous braggadocio, and where they will not even perhaps listen if smaller regulators do come out and demand a greater accountability of them.
It's impunity. And when you said, is this, it's going to get even worse, because this is only the moment where they take power, right? Like, I mean, again, look at the phrase, the Broligarchy, bros, the kind of toxic masculinity that really had put this together. An oligarchy, when a small group of people take power, right? So part of it is that now it's absolute impunity, right? But actually, if you look at it, so I've always compared this to like stepping on wood that has had termites eat into it. And,
Yes.
you don't know when that wood will collapse. I think, this is something that started in 2014. That was when, and slowly nothing stopped it. Even fact checking. If for me, I had always thought fact checking was was Meta's way, was Facebook's way of outsourcing accountability. And it didn't work all that well because ultimately the design of the platform rewarded the worst of humanity, rewarded lies, rewarded anger, rewarded hate,
Mm.
right? That incentive structure is horrific, but fact checking at least gave people a fighting chance that if they wanted to actually think slow versus thinking fast with their emotions, right? Because
Yes.
that's what technology did. It hacked our biology. It incited the worst in each of us: fear, anger, and hate. And then by changing the way we feel, it changed the way we looked at the world and changed the way we act, including the way we vote. But I think where it goes hand in hand here is the impunity that we are seeing in the physical world that is led to the wars. I mean, think about the active wars. In the 39 years I've been a journalist, we
Yes.
haven't lived through anything like this, right? So compare a Putin with Zuckerberg, where they just go and do what they want, right? Like, and Marichka Sharkey, a former member of the European Parliament, actually wrote
Yes.
this book where she compared what are the tactics. And let's look at their tactics. It's media capture, right? It's NGO capture, it's academic capture leading to state capture. And I can name these in many countries, right? Because the media capture is it's taking advantage and in many ways funding
Yes.
some of the things that it's part of the tech lobby. The second one is NGO capture, NGOs that are literally funded to bring the tech perspective against laws, against safety. The third, academic capture. I resigned from a well known university, from the Reuters Institute for School of Journalism, of because it was tearing down the foundations of fact-based, evidence-based reasoning. And finally, you've lived through state capture. I think that this is it's so I don't know, Ferial, I should ask you, like,
Yes.
how to stop the impunity? How can we do this? How can individuals, because that's now at the level that we're operating on, who don't even realize that they're being manipulated, who, because of their own fears that have been fanned, have it's always been the us against them have been used by dictators to control people. Populism has been used in the past, but it's particularly toxic at this day and age. And I think the most horrific part is that Mark Zuckerberg was cynical and calculating in getting rid of fact checking. He just decided company over country, company over the world, surveillance,
I thought
capitalism.
that you had a good relationship with him, that he had begun to hear your messages, hear your warnings.
I think kicking and screaming. I think what you
Kicking and
saw, and
screaming.
yeah, I think that the people around him, I think what we're seeing is the real Mark Zuckerberg. At least this is also
Ah.
what I've been told, right? Like
So
that.
the politically conscious progressive person who I thought I was beginning to hear, he's gone. Huh?
I think I think this is truly look. I've seen this in the Philippines. You've seen this in South Africa. He is obeying before, right? And they're obviously paying. I saw this in the Philippines. CEOs who want to curry favor with a president who will dispense favor, and in many ways that kind of corruption is easier to deal with if you're a businessman because it's quid pro quo, right? Versus a messy democracy and a bidding process and safety measures for people in the democracy. So I think at the beginning, I used to think that Mark Zuckerberg was just didn't understand. But then after Cambridge Analytica, remember we came out with our data in 2016. And
Yes.
part of that was because I never had to ask Facebook for data, and they never gave data because when you're the target of attack, Ferial, you know this, when you're the target of attack, you see everything coming at you, right? Like a
Yes,
fire hose,
absolutely.
and you can take
Mm.
that data. Um, But then after we did this in 2016, then what happened? Cambridge Analytica. Facebook remained in denial and actually did exactly what it has always done: delay, deny, deflect. Right? That's from, I just thought that was really incredible. That was how it dealt with issues of accountability. It didn't change the fundamental
Hmm.
problem, which is make just a little bit less money. Frances Haugen, when she released more than
Yes.
10,000 plus pages of internal Facebook documents that showed that the company knew its harms. And I kept wondering, why? If it knows it, why? And it always goes right back to Mark Zuckerberg. So it's a combination of political, what he wants to do politically to protect and to make more money. But also, I think he's never been a target of attack. I mean, it would be really interesting if the women of the world decided to brigade Mark Zuckerberg. Like, what would that do? Well, he could easily tweak the designs of Facebook so he is
I
safe.
think they might just do that. They're in a state of impunity. I want to go to one more thing before we start scoping out, thinking about how we approach this moment. Later on in the series of inauguration meetings, I listened to Elon Musk at the parade, and I was absolutely gobsmacked to see him make what I was very clearly looked to me like a fascist or a Hitlerite salute. And I thought, before I call it that, let me go and see. And today, I think the consensus view is that that is exactly what that salute was. So, I mean, he's big tech. I know that you say they're going to exist now in a state of almost complete impunity, but are they also going authoritarian on us? Because, like you said, you've been at the forefront with an army of digital protectors, of trying to instill a kind of civic consciousness into a very powerful industry. But it seems now that we may be seeing something even more chilling in the political direction that big tech is taking.
Yeah, I think it's even more dangerous than that. I think they always have been oligarchs, right? Mark
Ah,
Zuckerberg is the largest shareholder, and that's part of the reason the design of Facebook hasn't changed significantly. They've done palliative efforts. Fact checking was a palliative effort that took the heat off because once people, I mean, how can you have genocide happen in Myanmar and no one be held accountable when both the UN and Meta itself admitted that the platform that Facebook enabled this, right? It played a role in genocide.
yes.
And we've seen this in different parts of the world. But look, when you're saying that this is what Elon Musk is your fault, South Africa. No,
Yes.
sorry.
Well,
You
people
know,
always say that. Take him
I
back,
know.
take him back.
I
Just say no,
know.
no, thank you.
Oh my God. Right? Like, and actually, I'm starting to see some of that, right? Because he is South African. Because what we have seen globally, before I answer your question, let me just say there are only two fracture lines in every society that have been splintered wide open by information operations, both disinformation and misinformation. And it bothers me a lot that Western news organizations don't use disinformation because I think that's the result of a tech lobby because it begins with a push for power. What are the two fracture lines? It is gender and it is race, right? Like
Yes,
when people in America, when journalists were saying, that when they were saying, why did Trump win? Well, because it's inflation or it's immigration. Both of these issues, we've always had inflation, but it's never led us to this, right? Both of these issues have been taken. These are deep dive studies that we've done in the United States and in the UK.
yes,
Both of them are race issues, right? Like immigration. In the United States, we did a study that showed you the most far fetched lies were thrown into immigration and amplified by Facebook. And that is actually, it's their fault. It manipulates people. Anyway, sorry, let me answer your question. I think Donald Trump, President Trump, is making a Faustian deal. And here's why. Because, again, I go to Marichka Shaka's book. It's called The Tech Coup. And I'm going to push it
mm,
to a further to a further conclusion, right? These tech companies are already authoritarian in scope because they are not accountable to anyone except for, so they move for profit, right? And so they'll say, oh,
Right.
well, it's sorry, it's not what we meant, but we're aiming for profit. But every day that democratic nations, that countries do not regulate the tech companies, is a day where the tech company becomes stronger and the state gets weaker. And we have seen this pattern where the tech company has taken powers that only used to be exercised by government. A perfect example is Starlink and Elon Musk, where he just decided
Yes.
unilaterally that Ukraine was not going to be able to attack Russia with drones because he's not going to allow it on Starlink, right? So these are, again, the tech
Mm.
coup
So
is in
it
full
becomes like
force
it's supranational. It's a tech coup.
globally. And again, I will say this, countries are abdicating their power with every day they do not regulate technology. They lose more and more of their power to the tech companies, where again, we'll go to a point where will they be too big to fail? Will you not be able to regulate them anymore? I hope it's not the case that we can't regulate them
I,
anymore
I
because
I just want a short follow on that. What interests me about the Broligarchy, when you begin looking deeper into them, is the clear political ambition and aspiration of several of them, Elon Musk being the leader of that, where not that he wants to become president of the US. I think his ambitions are greater than that, where he wants to influence what happens in Europe, where he wants to influence what happens in the UK. Maybe they'll move to other spheres of the globe, but that's where his ambition seems to be stretching to. And there are others in that grouping, say your Peter Thiels, also with some history in South Africa. To me, coming from where I do, I have absolutely no doubt that the roots of white supremacy continue to linger in them. And you're seeing that coming out in their political ambition right now.
you're absolutely correct. And, again, this is just starting to get discussed in the United States. Elon Musk's roots in South Africa and, growing up in an environment where white supremacy, where apartheid needed to happen, right? Where it needed to. So I think too, what are they after? This isn't like just taking over the United States. This is global domination. And they actually already have done it if you think about it, right? Facebook, 3.2 billion accounts, right?
Yeah.
Again, it is global domination in terms of economics, in terms of connections, the data that it has gotten. But they actually literally have an entire many of the tech companies, Peter Thiel, Mark Andreessen called fact checking evil, right? In a manifesto in 2023. He called ethics evil in an 11,000 word manifesto. So part of it is they have a philosophy. They believe that tech, people who run tech, that machines will do better than people in governance, in handling power, right? And part of that is because they sit at the top. They are the apex of the tech world. There's a whole philosophy called effective altruism. It does connect directly to white supremacy, and you're seeing this. So what we're seeing is, Viktor Orban in Hungary actually put it in the constitution, in Hungary's constitution, where what did they call it? It's not white supremacy. He called it something else. But again, yes, it's racism. It goes right back
Yeah.
to this, right? We are going back in time. So it isn't, I guess, to go back to your question about um, the Broligarchy, they have a currency that they wanted to replace financial institutions with. They are aiming to literally change. I sound like a conspirator. This sounds like a conspiracy
No, but we're
theory.
seeing it coming true when the US president has a meme coin and so has the first lady, and they make instant overnight fortunes. It's clear that it's jumped from I don't think ever was conspiracy, but from um, analysis of what could happen to reality. It's
I
right
think it's
there.
more than analysis. I think it's we've already seen it, right? Like in Oxford University, Nick Bolton had an institute that was backed by Elon Musk that's since been shut down, right? Look, I think this is part of, like I said, there are only two fracture lines that are being ripped apart for power and money. It's gender and race, and and we're seeing it come to pass. What is it called in? It's not white supremacy in Hungary. It's white replacement theory. White
White
replacement
replacement.
theory,
Wow.
right? Like it's literally in the Constitution, and you're seeing this play out again in a different way in the United States. And it's ironic because J.D.
Oh,
Vance's wife is Indian of Indian descent, right? It was
yes,
really
I
I
looked
was
at
watching the
Usha.
tail
I looked at
end.
Usha Vance last night, and I was like, "What's going through your mind?" But anyway, that's another story. So both you and I have covered these authoritarian or strongman regimes, like you say, Duterte in the Philippines, and over on our side, it was very much a strongman leader, the former President Jacob Zuma, who I must tell you is made a phenomenal comeback, and then the media always comes into their target. So, what do you think is likely to happen in the US, and will it have a domino effect? I was watching your former journalistic home, CNN, last night with some interest. Great journalist there. But it felt to me like they were struggling to call a spade a spade. That you
We
have to
know
walk this, you have to do this egg dance, you self censor when you can see what's happening.
I think about this right now, even the way we're speaking. Part of it is you and I are both friends and we've lived through this and the words, right? Like we've already gone through what America's going through. I think American journalists uh, are in the middle of boiling water. And the question is going to be, are they going to say they're in the middle of boiling water? And let's talk about this in terms of power and money, right? It's
Yes,
power and money. And that is actually what we're talking about, which is why, President Biden talking about an oligarchy, actually call it a kleptocracy. That's what we lived through in the Philippines. But I
yes,
think there are consequences. You know this, I know this. When you stand up and actually do a bullseye arrow, call it uh, autocracy, call it dictatorship, right? You get hammered. And the question is if you are with an organization, it's not just you, it's the organization. So in the Philippines, the largest network in the Philippines, it would be, it was the most powerful. I used to run the news organization. It had more than 1,000 people. The actual
mm,
network is 5,000 people, and um, it it's it was targeted by President Duterte because it was reporting the drug war. The largest newspaper was targeted by President Duterte. So it was first the newspaper, then the television network, then it was online, then it was Rappler. The newspaper decided within 2 weeks to sell to a crony of the
mm,
president. The second, the network decided to try to negotiate. The third, us, the online network, we fought straight out. And I was told by my lawyers, as the cases were racking up, um,
yes,
you're foolish to do this. And yet, look at what happened. The largest network lost its franchise to operate by doing backroom deals, by trying to
yes,
pacify a dictator. Um, they literally, it's like losing it. They lost their license to operate in American terms,
mm,
but in the Philippines every television network needs a franchise. So it was
yes,
it was essentially decapitated by Duterte. Rappler is still
mm,
around. Shockingly,
yes.
we survived, right? Like doing the right thing is the right thing because the mission
There's a
of
lesson
journalism.
in that. There's a lesson in that.
Absolutely. Journalists, this is the time when journalism must stand up. The mission must lead. Otherwise, your power and your money will go away. right? That's the lesson we learned in the Philippines. If you don't exercise the mission, the reason why your public trusts you, right? If you don't call a spade because you're slowly trying to protect yourself, right? Remember, our standards and ethics is about calling, telling our community what is happening in the world without even if it goes against our own interests. That's what's being tested today. So
Absolutely.
if American journalism fails this, we've seen this in the Philippines, right? Not only will an autocracy or a dictatorship arise, but their own power will erode. It's like termites eating wood.
You've certainly seen that. So my final question is, one of your calls to action to all of us is always courage on hold the line. So how do we knit a future for journalism as an important, a vital, I'd argue, linchpin of democracy and praxis of democracy, when you have a not inaccurate mantra by Elon Musk to his gazillion followers, where he tells them, "You are the media now." How do we hang together? How do we withstand what are going to be testing times? Because America's big, and when it sneezes, the world will catch cold still.
Yeah,
How do we
absolutely.
keep on?
Oh my gosh. So first, I think we need to call a spade a spade. We need to tell people that they are being manipulated and it will get worse, that it will be difficult to figure out what is real and what isn't. Trust is completely broken, right? So I always think if you're my generation, and this was a few years ago when I started saying it's like we are the batteries in the movie The Matrix. It is our
Yes.
power and our energy that is being sucked by the Matrix. Remember, they're living in pods and then they're each in their illusions. So it's like Matrix meets the Truman Show. In our illusions, we're creating these worlds and performing, right? But no one is watching but us. So the first step is like we got to know that we're the batteries fueling these actually the former finance minister of Greece, Yanis Varoufakis, called it techno-feudalism. He says capitalism is dead and that these big tech companies, which don't really produce anything, right? They're rent seeking. They use our power and energy, that we now live in a techno-feudalist world. They're techno-feudalism.
So we have to take ourselves away. Is that what you're saying?
We have to realize that that we are the ones powering it, right? That they, without us, that these companies are actually nothing. Yeah, right? Like, because we're using their products and services thinking that it's free and this goes back to something many, many years ago we've been talking about. You are the product. And, I don't know if you remember, do you remember a movie called Soylent Green?
I don't.
Oh my God. So Soylent Green, the very line, for those who remember, Soylent Green is the people. Like they're eating people without, anyway, it's too many movies.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So the food that was chopped up.
Yeah, you
right,
are the product. That we know.
Right,
Your content is
that is the world we live in now. And let me go to another one, the Brave New World. Soma, the drug that was used to drug people.
Yes.
That is, when you're on the social media platforms, you are literally, you have increased levels of dopamine. Part of the reason that you keep scrolling is because of the design of that, to keep you scrolling, because they make more money for profit. All right, so what do we need to do? The first is we need to call a spade a spade. They're going to be dangers to this, but the more of us who do it, the more of us who stand up, the better it will be for all of us. I think the second thing is that we need to call for an end to impunity. This is now the same moment, and we've lived through these moments in history where humanity will either rise to the challenge or we will fall into a fascist phase, right? Because the tools of these tech companies are fantastic tools for dictators. right?
Yeah.
So civil society, journalists, lawyers. How can you have rule of law if you don't have facts? We need to now more than ever. And, I think we're trying very hard in Rappler. What we decided was that a few years ago that the tech companies are never going to prioritize safety. There is not one that does, because it goes against their ability to profit. So we began to push for a public tech stack, and little Rappler in the Philippines began to build it. And we hope to come to South Africa also. So what does this mean? We used a matrix protocol, and we built a chat app that's built on the matrix protocol, which allows you can go online, have a conversation, real people having conversations with real people in a shared reality where you're not being manipulated. You're not on drugs. Sorry, that goes back to, Brave New World. I was saying that this concept of feeding people soma so that they are like lemmings heading off the cliff.
Yes.
This feels like that kind of time. My God, I sound so
it's
dystopian.
No. So it's using tech in those ways, building up alliances, strengthening your civil society partnerships, and always staying true to facts, even though it's very difficult to do.
And the way to do that, what we've learned, you and I, is through our values, right? It goes right back to that, right? Like, I am not going to attack someone else because they're different. Like, these are things I believe in. So here's the last part. And it's ironic because today is this year is the 25th year. Once every 25 years, the Catholic Church has a jubilee. So at the Vatican on January 25th, on 25, I'll be the journalist talking to 8,000 people in that big hall where the Pope normally gives his meets the Catholics, and the Pope will be there. And so he has journalists kicking off the year of the Jubilee. Journalists who have also done investigative reporting on what has happened inside the church, right?
That's just beautiful.
I think that is what we need, right? Like, because if institutions like the Catholic Church, like Islam, like the Jewish communities, right? Like, because faith, these religions, the world religions in the past, have been social justice movements. So faith also needs to jump in now. We need to have faith in the goodness of humanity.
I have to have faith in the goodness of humanity, and I have to say that having come through a history like ours, and in seeing people make a constitution like ours after years of the kinds of resistance, micro resistances that build into a wave, it has to be possible. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.